this is JDH Consultant 86 on YouTube, and this is my do-it-yourself on how to set up a Linux attack and defense environment. Now, I've already done some of the work. I've integrated Metasploitable to Linux. I've already created a snapshot, which I call my baseline, so that any changes I make to it can be undone and reverted back to that baseline. And now, I've already created the virtual machine for Kali. It has 2 gigs of RAM, 1 processor, 25 gigs of SSD space. It's got all the other standard hardware. I removed the printer, which is something I don't see why a virtual machine ever needs to have that, unless you're actually using a virtual machine in place of a production environment, which is pretty common if you're running a cloud server. So I'm going to go ahead and power this on and see what we can do. That's really annoying. So, without further ado, let's get this install started. You know what? I want to go to the blast of the past, so I'm not going graphical. I'm going command line. Oh, that's not good. Never mind. Okay, so we've already selected that. Let's go ahead and select United States. We don't need anything but American English. I'm relatively impressed with how quickly this virtual machine is running. Of course, it could have something to do with the fact that my system has 32 gigs of RAM and one of the more recent Core i7 processors. Which, if you watched the introduction video, you should see a nice little picture of all the different components that went into the construction of this system. So my domain name is going to be this. Kali.attacker.com. My root password. Don't bother asking me what it is. I'm not handing this over. Good enough. Use entire disk. Looks good to me. Write changes to disk, yes. Now, as for Linux, my understanding is that it's extremely good at figuring out how to set up all the different directories and stuff. So it's not like the olden days when you had to really have a good idea of what you were planning in order to make it happen. Nowadays, Linux is pretty good at figuring that out for you. And as for older versions of it, I have used older versions where you've had to know that information. Consider it a rite of passage when you have to learn how to do something like that. And perhaps someday I'll do a video of it, demonstrating it. I still have some of the original versions of Linux. Not that that's particularly monumental. You can get those anywhere pretty much, but I always get nervous when it hangs around this install thing. much. I should have gotten the absolute latest Core i7. No, I seriously doubt it'll make much of a difference. I do have to apologize for getting this video out so late in the game. Unfortunately, schooling takes up a great deal of my time. And no, I don't spend most of my time drinking like my peers. I actually have responsibility, believe it or not. Thankfully, I don't have to worry about ever having such a big YouTube fan base, because quite frankly, I'm only doing this so I can further my own career, not for any particular need to have subscribers. But to those that should subscribe because they like this video, hey, thank you. I appreciate it. It'll definitely encourage me to be a little bit more forthcoming with updates in the future. Yeah, I'm really surprised this is taking so long. I thought it'd be a little bit quicker than this. May have to run a little bit of maintenance when I'm done with this. Don't really need to worry about a proxy right now. Wow, if it really takes 3 minutes to download a file that's probably just a text file, I'm going to be awfully disappointed. I'm assuming it's still downloading the network mirror list. If that's not the case, then of course it does say configuring the apt program right now, but my thing is that you have to take some things that Linux says with a grain of salt. Doesn't mean it's actually doing that. It could be doing background stuff in preparation of that, or unfortunately, even though it's a really great operating system, and it is, Linux still has what I'd call some rough edges that need fanned out. And it is true that I could rough those out if I wanted to, but I'm not much of a programmer, so that's not going to happen. The best I can do is be like the other angry hundreds of thousands of people that spout off emails to the creators. I at least try to make mine constructive. Of course, let's be perfectly honest, Windows sucks a whole lot more than Linux does. Unfortunately, most lab environments that I've seen require you to use Windows far more than Linux. At the school I go to, for instance, which will remain nameless for the time being, there are no computers there with Linux on them that I'm aware of. Which is rather quite sad when you think about it. Even our Linux class didn't use Linux computers, they used Windows computers, right? And absolutely no clue, none whatsoever, about how to do anything creative, because that wasn't what the teacher wanted to do. Ultimately, she just wanted the class to do all the assignments in the back of the books type stuff, and let's be honest, you don't really learn anything doing that. You learn by doing this kind of stuff. And we're at the infamous blue screen. Now it's probably getting ready to ask me another inane question. Wow, that has me kind of worried now. It's not doing anything. Ah, there we go. Never mind. It's the one thing I definitely don't like about Linux, is that when something breaks, and it more often will, because it's pretty much constantly a work in progress, in my opinion. They are always making adjustments to it and updates to it, changing things. And that's what's great about Linux, actually, because it's not like Windows, where Windows will remain stagnant for many years, and then all of a sudden they'll put out a ton of features that you just absolutely hate. No real changes that you can make to it. Yes. But with Windows, a good example is the move from Windows 7 to Windows 8, right? I mean, let's be perfectly honest. This is Microsoft making a very bad decision. And, cool. And it's a bad decision because, let's be perfectly honest, those of us who actually work with computers professionally and get a real kick out of it know that we absolutely hate Windows 8. We hate Windows 10. We hate it because it's a step in the wrong direction. Yes, there are methods that you can change settings and change files out to where you can make it appear like Windows 7 again. But not really, because then you have the whole telemetry thing, which basically is an absolute nightmare, It is. It's an absolute nightmare. Yes, you can block most of that if you're creative enough, which I'll admit I know how to do to a certain extent, but you can't block all of it. I mean, quite literally, the only way you can block most of it is if you've got the entire operating system. Completely deactivate Cortana. You have to almost uninstall her files. It's the only way you can keep Microsoft from checking in on everything you're doing on your own system. If you ask me, you should be able to own your computer, not have your computer own you. Now let's go ahead and see if this goes into Linux without any problems. Kali Linux, that's an important distinction. Again, I don't know why that was screwing up. But, so it looks like everything's turned out pretty good. All the programs seem there. I don't have time to go through the entire list, but I will definitely be checking and correcting any problems later. But it seems to have worked. And as for the tools I see so far, like Armitage, which is basically a GUI for Metasploit, that's really cool. I can't wait to really get into this stuff. Now, I know what people are going to be thinking, you know. It seems rather strange, because I'm going to explain to you that I'm not a penetration testing expert. I'm not studying to be that at all. I have ambitions of wanting to be a network, eventually a network admin, possibly working up higher than that, maybe a guy who actually makes policy. But the reason why I study attack the offense is so I can formulate a better defense. That has always been my belief, is that in order to understand how the enemy, in order to be able to defend against the enemy, you need to understand how they attack. You need to understand how they function. And there was a particular quote from Sun Tzu. I can't quite remember it right now, but when I get the Windows video out there, I'll probably talk about it in there. But I gotta tell you, that book of philosophy is probably one of the coolest little books I ever read. I got that when I was in San Francisco. I lived there for a year. Yeah, it's really not that bad, believe it or not. Once you get past all the weird hippie stuff, it's actually a pretty cool place to live. So, it looks like this turned out okay, and I can move on to the next OS. What I want to do is I want to power it off safely so that I don't screw anything up. I want to put it in the Linux folder so that it's there rather than somewhere else. Kali, Debian, Fedora. Okay, so what we're going to go ahead and do is set up the Fedora system right now. Actually, we're going to set up the Debian system right now, because Fedora is going to take a little bit longer because I'm doing a workstation and a server image. There's really no point in giving it any more resources than it actually needs. Again, I'm going to remove the printer. There's absolutely no reason to have that there. I need to get rid of this stupid hint thing. You know what? I'm pretty comfortable with the old school install. English language, United States, American English. Now, if you're in another country and all that, it's pretty self-explanatory what you need to do. There shouldn't be any major hiccups with that. Debian.defense.com. So as for, time zone really isn't all that crucial to me for these labs. I'm not really going to care if they have the correct time on there or not. If it ends up being a problem later, I can always readjust that. I'm fine with those settings the way they are. Now, am I an advanced user of Linux? Yeah, I kind of am, but, I've been using Linux for, a while now. I wouldn't really call myself an advanced user, so I should correct myself there, but I am somebody who's had experience, so I don't really need to. I could choose to partition it manually, but there's really no point, as I've said earlier. I mean, that's something you'd only have to do in the older days when they didn't really have scripts to handle that. It used to be, back in the old days, Linux wasn't as user-friendly as it is nowadays. Now, I wasn't, alive in the 70s, but, I know people who were, and they've told me that. And I even remember when I was a kid, I used to fiddle around with Linux, and it was kind of a pain back then, but nowadays it's relatively straightforward. There haven't been too many major issues with it as far as I know. No. I'm going to select United States, and for my mirror, I don't know, I'll just stick with the default. Don't really need to worry about that. Now, this is going to have a fair amount of Linux and Windows systems, and the reason why is because I want to have a fair amount of defenders for me to fiddle around with, so that it'll give me a fair amount of video content I'll be able to upload on YouTube. You don't really need this many lab environments in order to do this. Now, in these series of videos, I am not going to be integrating any of the computers together just yet. That'll happen later, after I've created appropriate snapshots for everything and put everything to its proper position, where I want it and how I want it to behave. And so, as you can imagine, this is going to be quite a number of videos being put out there. It seems like this process is taking a lot longer than it should. I was originally going to do a video on Arch Linux, but that kind of reminds me a little too much of the day when doing this sort of thing was way too difficult. You know, if you ask me, that whole operating system is kind of a step backwards in some ways. It seems like if they really wanted people to be able to embrace it, they would make the process just a little bit easier to understand. But the fact of the matter is there are so many different ways of doing it on there, setting up a system and getting partitions added and doing all that stuff. It just really rubs me the wrong way. You know, it makes me feel like they didn't really want anybody who wasn't some sort of absolute tech guru to be messing with it. And if you ask me, that's one of the biggest problems in our industry, is that we have always kind of had a tendency to treat people who don't have the knowledge or training that we've got as if they're stupider than us. We've always been kind of condescending and arrogant about how we explain to customers about why their computer broke, or, you know, how much it's going to cost. And I feel that's why there's a great deal of mistrust from our industry, especially when you talk about mom and pop shops that do computer repair, because it's kind of like that, how do I describe this? It's kind of like that slick car salesman, you know? That guy who tells you, oh, that engine runs fine, you don't need to get no technician out here to take a look at it. I promise you, it'll run until the day you die. Yeah. I think that's how people kind of see people who do garage repair work on computers, because, and what I mean by that is, you know, people who basically fix computers in odd places, you know, like in their garage or in their bedroom or in a living room, because you gotta start somewhere. You gotta start your company somewhere. And I haven't really met anybody who works out of their garage in a business capacity or works out of their bedroom in business capacity that hasn't had at least one customer treat them like they're a slick car salesman. And it's kind of disheartening, really, because you realize, for those of us who are truly honest and give honest prices and honest consultation without the fear and gimmicks, we get punished because of this misconception. So I would say it's definitely damaging to our field and to what we do. Now, does it happen a whole lot anymore? Well, surprisingly, nowadays, you don't really get too many customers anymore. People are much quicker to buy something to replace it than they are to ask you to fix it. No, I don't want to participate in the survey. Cool, I can select all kinds of different desktop environments. I don't need it to be a web server or print server. I'm gonna go with GNOME, just because it works good. Haven't had any problems with that. But as I've said, you know, it's something that's kind of been a consistent thorn in my side and many other fellow colleagues, I guess you could call them, because we all do talk to each other. It is something that we would like to see put a stop to. A lot of the rampant dishonesty in the computer field, computer repair field specifically, where, you know, people are being lied to, people are having fear tactics used against them to get them to pay for services they don't really need. And it's a very, and it is, I'm being honest here, it's a very disheartening experience to hear that. Disheartening. I have trouble speaking sometimes, forgive me. But yeah, it's definitely something that bothers me a lot. That's why every time customer contacts me, says, hey, you know, I need help with this, you know, I need you to do a complete overhaul in the thing, I'll tell them straight up, I don't charge for labor. I don't charge for software installs. I don't charge to reinstall your operating system. You foot the bill for the hardware, and you give me a good shout out to all your friends. Be willing to even do a little thing for my resume. Be willing to do a testimonial on my blog. Then I will not charge you a penny. And that's always been my deal with every customer. As a matter of fact, I've insisted that if you insist on paying me, all I ask is you buy me lunch. That's worked out pretty well, I think. I'm a pretty cheap guy, Get me a sandwich or two, a fry from McDonald's, that's good enough for me, That easily justifies me taking the time out of my day to helping you solve your problems and helping you get that work document you need. And you ain't got to worry about me stealing your personal information. That's the great thing about us geeks who work out of our basements or work out of our garages or work out of our bedrooms, is that we tend to be far more honest than the people that you pay thousands of dollars to do the same exact work that we do for next to nothing. Now, does this pay the bills? Obviously not. Not if you're, going to college. This is something you can only do when you're in college. Get into the real world, this is not economically feasible. But it's something that I do enjoy, and I am going to miss it when the time comes. Wow, I sure do see a lot of things for LibreOffice in here. Something I'll absolutely never use. So it seems like the problem that starting to touch Windows is starting to touch Linux as well. It's the same thing that's been plaguing our cell phones for quite some time. Being stuck with programs that you simply do not use. Now, if you ask me, what they should have done is created an installation page on here so that you could just deselect certain things that you don't plan on using. LibreOffice would have been the first to go. Definitely. Oh, cool. Looks like it's almost done. Yes, I would like to install the Grub bootloader. Yes, on SDA. Now, if you have another operating system installed on here, you might not want to do that. It just depends on what your particular installation is going to be, because I have seen Grub really screw up Windows installations before. It does happen. Grub is not perfect, and in my opinion, it can be even more problematic than having Windows on a computer, depending on how it is. It just depends on what your luck is. And it looks like it installed correctly. Let's go ahead and power it off and go to the next OS. So the next that we're going to be working with is Fedora Workstation. I absolutely hate how this cannot differentiate between Workstation and server OSs that well. Really no point in adjusting any of the settings on here that much. Not unless you're wanting a specific setup or specific networking. Again, that's something that can be adjusted at a later time and point. There's really no point in getting worked up about that right now. So I took the printer off and finished. Really no point in testing the media. I've already done that. I think what would be great is if they came out with an image for this that didn't require you to load a live image first. In my opinion, it would probably be faster than trying to load a graphical environment, load up all the different processes associated with that, and then having to load up an installation program that's going to be taking up a fair amount of resources as well. So I just clicked install. And I'm a little disheartened to see that it apparently was not registered. Oh, wait a minute, there it goes. Never mind. Okay. English, United States. Alright, good. Just gotta work on that patience, I guess. Indiana, Indianapolis. That looks about accurate. Okay. Again, I want to leave it on automatically configure partitioning. Everything looks good here. Now it should allow me to continue. I don't know why it would take this long to save storage configuration, but hey. There we go. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and begin installation because I don't really think there's anything I need to worry about now. And while it's doing that, we'll go ahead and set the root password. And we're going to go ahead and set the that's pretty neat. But I don't need that. I don't really need to worry about that because that's just a standard user, so the password doesn't need to be unduly large. This is an insanely slow process. After this, we're going to be installing Fedora server, and then that'll be the end of this video. Now, is it just me, or does that blue bar not represent the percentage number whatsoever? I'm sure that has no bearing on the actual outcome. Well, that's an exceptionally long installation process. You gotta admire the people who had the patience to code this. Okay. We can go ahead and power it off because it's already installed. There's no point in bringing it up right now. And then one more installation, and then this video will be done. You know what? I don't want to do it through there. I don't know why it's having me do it through here. Now, as for resources, because this is only a lab environment, I don't really need to assign any of these servers any, serious amount of resources. That's not really something I need to worry about. I can always adjust them later if I need to, so it's not a tremendous problem if I do. It's the great thing about VmWare and VirtualBox is that you can pretty much change anything you want at any given time. There's no point of no return on anything. And get rid of the printer. Again, I don't know why they keep wanting me to put a printer with everything. Now, in the future, I will be installing the VmWare tools manually. That will be done off screen, so that I can. Okay. Looks like it's making me choose a password regardless. Will be interesting to see how the server versus the workstation operates. I don't know what the difference might be. Now, as of making this video, I am using the absolute latest editions of everything, including Metasploitable, Kali, Fedora, and Debian. And this lab is not specifically just for penetration testing or anything like that. This is just a general computing laboratory environment. It's kind of strange to see advertisements on a Linux OS install screen. It's kind of strange, if you ask me. Seems like Linux is really moving towards a almost a commercial platform with all of that stuff going on, which really wouldn't be all that surprising. Inevitably, I think that's what a lot of open source and free software is going to move towards. In some manner or another, they're going to get you to pay for something. It seems to be how the cookie crumbles, so to speak. Now, I've never used this before, so I don't know if it'll go to a GUI or a command line or what. Or terminal, I mean. See, I've been using Windows for a little too long, so I get confused about what the proper terminology for certain things should be. If I call it a command line, just immediately assume I'm talking about terminal. I'm not always going to get that right. It's just, even though I love Linux a fair amount, I'm going to mess that up. And if that makes me sound ignorant, well, so be it. But to me, it's very important that I just do things my way and not worry about how other people feel about it. Now, to any potential employers that may be watching, that does not mean that I'm going to throw out any training manuals or instructions that are given to me. That's just me saying that, I'm not going to change my terminology to make other people happy. It makes sense to me. It makes sense to me. It works. So at first glance here, this seems to be somewhat slow. I don't know if it's just me or my impatient nature or... It might be because this is the first time installing it, so it's kind of loading up all the appropriate scripts and stuff. Wow, it's really going to a crawl right at that last little colored bar there. Wow, of course. I can't remember what the package manager for this particular version of Linux is. I don't know. I'll have to look it up later, but I haven't used Fedora before, so at least not in a long time. I used the desktop version, so I don't remember what the command is, which is rather embarrassing. But I'm going to go ahead and log out. Whoops. What am I doing? Whatever, I think we've established this does work. So I'm going to go ahead and create a baseline snapshot, or a snapshot, sorry, of every single virtual machine on here, regardless of what it is. just double check that this one has one. This will not only allow me to basically go back to a already known working version. Okay, that's already got one. It'll also allow me to fix any problems that might crop up because of a setting I changed or whatnot. So it's very useful. But anyways, this concedes our, or rather, this ends our Linux virtual machine setup video. Thank you and good night.